Afternoon, everybody. My name's Gene Bransfield, and I'm here to talk to you about the war kit, weaponizing your pets. So, introduction. Who am I? I'm Gene Bransfield. I work for Tenacity Solutions. I'm a principal security engineer, and hang around with me as much time as you want to, and you're going to figure out pretty quick, I love my job. It's great to get up and do stuff you love every day and get paid for it. And people start hanging about me, and they say, hey, man, tell me about your job. What's this, what's that? And they think that I don't know that they want my job. But the joke's on them because they're never going to have my job. I'm going to be that guy that dies like on a Friday before a long weekend, and then you come in Tuesday morning, and there I am laying on the floor, and people's like, yeah, don't step on that stain over there. That's the Gene Bransfield Memorial stain. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about having a humorous idea, bringing that idea to fruition, the stories of triumph and woe associated with that, and valuable lessons learned. So weaponizing your pets. Why in God's name would you want to do that? Well, the background of this is that 15% of the world's internet traffic is dedicated to cats. That's an actual statistic. We have the entire world's knowledge base at our fingertips, and we spend time on YouTube, lolcats, and Facebook. But I find most tech briefings boring, and I know most lay people do, and when I have to give them, I'm sitting there looking at the audience, and I get a little bit technical, and people start glazing over, and they get there thinking of jujubes or whatever it is. So just on a lark, I started including humorous pictures of cats in my talks. In fact, this is the first one I ever used. Started this entire situation. And I started weaving in stories with the cats and using humorous pictures of cats, and people started paying attention, and I got rather notorious for my presentation style. And I just finished a particular presentation. Somebody came up and told me that they were going to give me this cat tracking collar. It had a GPS component and a cellular component. It would tell you where your cat was, and if you were nervous, you could send it a text message, and it would text you back with the GPS coordinates of where your cat is. And I thought, well, that's really cool. All I need now is a little Wi-Fi sniffer, and I have a war kit. So working animals are nothing new. We have military dogs, we have police dogs, and they have really awesome dogs that jump out of the back of airplanes into the sea. And then we have even more awesome dogs. See that guy right there? He's wearing a gas mask. The dog's wearing a gas mask too. They jumped out of an aircraft at like 30,000 feet. That is an awesome dog. And of course, here we have a real Navy SEAL. The Navy has been for a long time using marine mammals in part of harbor defense and searching for mines and things like that. And so again, they do exercises with the real SEALs, and they're like, the real SEALs are like coming up real close, going to attack a harbor, thinking they'd be all stealthy. All of a sudden, Flipper jumps out of the water with a GoPro. Click, got you. And apparently, every time they do an exercise with the marine mammals and the real Navy SEALs are scared out of the water because it's really hard to fight a porpoise. So other research efforts that happened, the acoustic kitty. This is like something from the 60s that happened at the CIA, and apparently they had a lot of bad ideas and some good ideas, but they're sitting around a table one day, imagine this, and some guy says, okay, cool, let's take a cat, and we're going to put a transmitter in his chest, and a microphone in his ear, and an antenna down his spine. It's going to call it the acoustic kitty, and it's going to be awesome. And somehow, this got funded. I don't know how, but it did. And so they were doing all kinds of research on it. In the first operational test, they put the cat down. They wanted him to go over there and talk and listen into a conversation, but he ran right out into traffic, and that was the end of Acoustic Kitty. And so that project just got defunded, not because they thought it was a bad idea, but because the scientists are like, oh, thank God the cat died. I am so sick of working with cats. I never want to do this again. So cats are really hard to work with. Let's keep that in mind as we go along. So my stuff, I'm going to put a collar or harness on a cat, let the cat go around and collect data and recover it when it returns. Rule number 0 is the cat shall not be harmed. I'm not the biggest fan of cats on the planet, but I am not one to wantonly hurt an animal in any way, shape, or form. That's not just what I'm about. So requirement number 1, the cat shall be able to wear comfortably said stuff. I don't want him to get hung up on or anything. I also don't want any flashy lights going off. So the bird of prey is up there looking, oh, what's that blue light? Oh, kitty. And so we all want a GPS to record our waypoints as we go along, and we have a Wi-Fi scanner to figure out get SSID, and we get the signal strength, and we get the encryption algorithm. So that's my plan of attack. So there are other products out there that do kind of crazy stuff like that. Mr. Lee Cat Cam, you can buy it, and it's a little camera that hangs off the cat collar and takes pictures as it goes along. Pet Tracker, Garmin sells something similar, but none of them do SSID scanning for some reason. So my first plan was to get a GumStix here. It's a very small form factor computer. It's about the size of a stick of gum, and it runs a full Linux kernel on there. And that was really cool, but it's rather expensive. Cotton candy is also something that's pretty cool in the same vein. And the Rockchip 3066 is kind of like an open source piece of hardware that you can buy and hook up to the back of your TV. It was intended to do like HD streaming, but Kali Linux organization figured out a way to put a Kali Linux image on there. And I'm like, that's really cool. But I kept trying to do it and failing. So I got frustrated. I sat down and I thought about it and say, so I need something that's small form factor, has GPS, Wi-Fi, and cellular on that. Anybody have any idea what that could possibly be? How about a cell phone? Yes, it was sitting in my pocket the entire time. I just need a small cell phone to put on a cat, because that's a good idea, right? What could possibly go wrong? So now I need to make an APK, something to do some, war driving type stuff. I can do some Android coding. That'll be cool, right? Now, they already thought of that. It's called Wiggle. You can download it off the Android Play Store right now if you want to. So we've got a solution figured out. Now all we need is a volunteer cat. And this cat is named Skitsy, and my friend Reeves owns this cat. This cat is 22 inches from the base of its neck to the base of its tail. It has a 20-inch chest and a 12-inch neck. This is a big cat. So I'm not really worried about putting goofy stuff on him and his cat friends make fun of him because he'll just beat him up. So now we need something to put now we need something to put the phone on the cat. So a cat coat would be good, right? Except this cat coat won't work. And I looked on the internet, and there are no cat coats out there. If you Google cat coat, you're just going to get a picture of a girl wearing a coat that has a cat on it. But I figured the cat was big enough that maybe I could use a dog coat and get it small enough to fit on the cat, and here it is. So the plan now is put the tech in the coat, put the coat on the cat, and send the cat for a walkabout and recover the data when the cat returns, and then profit. So step 1, put the tech in the coat. Step 2, put the coat on the cat. And as you can see, he is completely thrilled about this situation. Step 3, let the cat go out. And then step 4, profit, right? No. Well, that's the back fence. He made it that far, got caught in the fence, and wiggled out of it. So what could have possibly gone wrong here? Well, it's obvious, right? We didn't put it on tight enough. So we put the tech in the coat, put the coat on the cat, put the cat on another walkabout, and we wait. And we wait and we wait and we wait, and it's gone for about 18 hours. People were kind of really freaked out. So at the back door, we finally hear a meow, and we open it up, and there he is. Now, I'd like to point out the configuration of the cat when he's leaving the house and the configuration of the cat when he's returning from the house, and there's obviously something missing. And we had a GPS tracker on there, and that's the last known GPS, and we went there, and the coat's not there. So lessons learned so far. Cats are really hard to work with. We knew that before. You always need to test your expensive stuff before you send it out with said feline. You're going to need an Amazon Prime account if you want to make this project go any further. And people were really worried about the cats, so we're not going to do any more coat stuff. I'm going to find a smaller form factor with a similar capability. So I talked to my friend Bill, who's a hobbyist and technologist, and he said, what about Arduino? It's a small form factor, low power consumption. It does what you need to do, no more, no less, and there's all kinds of chips and all kinds of variety of solutions. I said, that sounds cool, but I have one question. What is an Arduino? And it turns out Arduino was an Italian researcher who was doing his graduate degree, said, hey, we've got all this open source software out there. Why not open source hardware? And so that's where Arduino came from. It's a small form factor open source electronics platform. Lots of expansion boards. The board comes with a bunch of female headers pointing up, and the expansion shields could stack them on top of each other. And you can do all kinds of stuff, make robots, remote control cars. This guy used it to test his food in the freezer to see if it was still good. This guy created a robotic arm. He puts the glove on, he flexes his hand like that, and the arm does the same thing. And then this guy used it to cheat on his favorite video game. So you got all kinds of stuff, and people make all kinds of expansion slots out there. So I'm like, okay, that's cool, and it comes in a very small form factor. Good news is it's open source and rather inexpensive, except when you have to keep buying new ones because the cat keeps losing them on you. The bad news is sometimes it's poorly documented. Sometimes it can take forever to get you to, depending on the component you're ordering, and there may not be questionable performance. So I'm looking at Bill, and I'm hearing all this, and I'm like, well, that's great, but I've never done anything with Arduino. I've never worked with small firmware or small chipsets before. I'm not a professional coder, and I've never soldered before. And he said, it's pronounced solder. And I'm like, why did they spell it with an L in it? It doesn't matter. So he says, don't worry, it's easy. It's a great plan of a start of a terrible situation. So the plan now is to learn some stuff about Arduino, decide on the most accommodating form factor for the war kit, and put it all together in a collar for the win. So learning Arduino, you can get this Arduino beginner's kit. It comes with an Arduino Uno, and you see on there, and the expansion ports are on it. So I played around with this a little bit. I got the flashy things flashing when they're not supposed to, when they're supposed to flash, and not flashing when they're not supposed to flash. So I felt like I could get a little bit more advanced. I did some research. I need software libraries for Wi-Fi. They got it. Need it for GPS. They got it. Need it for the SD card. They got it. Great. So feeling more advanced, JeremyBlum.com. At this point, I needed some more advanced training. He's got a lot of videos out there on all the stuff that he puts together. If you're really interested in doing this, check him out. He's really cool. I learned a lot from him. So now, after all this learning and experimentation, I am an expert, right? So I went out and I got a Wi-Fi Shield, and I went out and got a GPS Shield. So the plan was to get the Wi-Fi Shield working and printing to the SD card, get the GPS working and printing to the SD card, combine the two code sets, and we're good to go. So the Wi-Fi Shield, the setup was pretty easy. The drivers worked pretty much the first time, messing around with parameters and variables for a couple days, and pretty much it started working. Victory. That was easy. So GPS, not so much. So a bit about GPS. The satellites are flying overhead right now. They are broadcasting what's known as a NMEA string, National Maritime Electronics Association. This comma separated value right here, starting with GPGGA, that's what they're broadcasting. So it's the job of the GPS receiver to take that in and translate it in date, time, lat, long, etc. The boot up process with your GPS, and anybody who's really needed to get somewhere in a hurry but didn't know where they were going and was waiting for their GPS thing to sync up, you can tell it's very frustrating. You turn it on, and it doesn't know if it's in your backyard on the other side of the planet. So it has to start listening to space and get a lock with at least 3 satellites and get then time and process the stuff and do the translation. This can take anywhere from 2 to 15 minutes. And I know from personal experience, if somebody's looking over your shoulder waiting for something to work, it's going to take 15 minutes. So the GPS Shield that I got was poorly documented, which is to say that it didn't have the appropriate baud rate in the documentation. It came with a thing. There was no docs in the kit. And I searched and searched forever to find out that the baud rate of this was 34,800. And this is like a week or so of troubleshooting. The problem is I tried to get an example for this to present at DEF CON, and now I can't not find that the baud rate is 34,800. But trust me, it wasn't included in there. So I put everything together. You can see in this particular page, the the Wi-Fi Shield is stacked on top of the Arduino, and the GPS Shield is off to the left. I put everything together, and I keep getting this weird error about something about 80% of memory is being utilized. But I see that on Windows all the time. I just blow it off, and everything works fine. Yeah. If the Arduino chip tells you that it's out of memory, it's just out of memory. That's all there is to it. The libraries and variables just way too much for what I was trying to do. The Arduino Uno only has 32K of memory. The Arduino Mega, however, has 256K of memory. So I went out and bought one of those, and you can see the size difference right there. It still stacks very well, and I get a couple extra ports. Put that together, and just a couple twists and turns aside, and it works. So now I have a prototype. The good thing about the Arduino memory is it's got Mo memory, which is Mo beta, Mo ports, which is Mo beta, Mo size is not Mo beta. Remember, the cat didn't tolerate the cell phone, so I'm trying to find something that's much smaller. So I went out and I looked around. The only thing I could find on the internet is this Arduino Mega Mini from JK Devices. Unfortunately, jkdevices.com turned out to be a complete fraud, but I didn't know that. That notwithstanding, so I got the Adafruit Wi-Fi, which is a breakout board here. It comes with the headers that you can then solder on and put onto the breadboard there. The Spark Core was another candidate for this. This is cool. It's got an Arduino in the front and Wi-Fi in the back, kind of like an Arduino mullet, if you want to. And the GPS chip, you can see the small form factor right there, GP635T, and a micro SD card for all the recording of all the stuff. But the Mega Mini says it's going to be at least 4 weeks before it ships, and I want to get this done now. Other solutions I'm looking at are too big in size or too small in the memory. So I'm down to the Spark Core chip, but there was a shipping problem with theirs. They're a startup company. They're on Kickstarter, and they're very early in their development. And there was something about customs in China that delayed the shipping for 2 months. So I borrowed one from my buddy Bill. So the tech on the Spark is as follows: an ARM 32-bit M3 CPU. It had that. A 128K memory, which is great. We had that. SPI and I2C compliant. SPI and I2C are the things the chips use to talk back and forth, kind of like internet for microcontrollers. It did those things. It had a TI CC3000 Wi-Fi chip on the board, which saved me space and form factor. Arduino compatible turned out to not be true, at least in my definition, which is to say it worked with the external components, but you can't just copy and paste your code out of everything you've done before into the Spark. It doesn't work that way. Apparently seasoned chip professionals know this. Suffice to say, I'm going to have to start all over from scratch, and I was not happy about that. But That notwithstanding, this solution is really, really cool. It's got a dedicated core group of developers who are doing stuff, and I look on the forums, and one day somebody came in and said, hey, I'd like it to do blah, and some engineer said, that's cool, and stayed up all night, and the next day they'd have code up there. So I'm like, well, this might work out in my favor anyway, so let's just see what happens. So libraries, somebody posted SD card libraries on the forums, and they compiled for me. Somebody posted GPS libraries to the forums, and they compiled and worked with my Shield. That's even better. Wi-Fi libraries, not so much, because the Spark Core is an Internet of Things device, and you're going to hear me mention that a couple times because it bit me a couple times. Wi-Fi is there as a service, and their plan of attack was, we'll connect you to the Internet, you do your coding, and then use our stuff to get to the Internet. You're not really supposed to mess with their Wi-Fi. But the Adafruit chip that I bought had the exact same Wi-Fi chip on it that the Spark Core was using, and the Adafruit had their libraries available for download off their website. So I downloaded those things, and this is the part where I tell you that, you know how Thomas Edison found 100 ways to make a light bulb before he actually made a light bulb? I found ways not to make a light bulb. I found plenty of ways not to make a cat collar, I'll tell you that. But so one of the things I did was mess around with the Adafruit stuff, and I found a good way to do the SSID scans. But since it's the same chip, do you think I could just throw it on there and it'll work? That's impossible. Wait, it worked first time. I'm like, holy crap, that's amazing. So I got something working now. So now I got GPS working on the Spark. I got SD card working on the Spark. I got SSID collection on the Spark. Now we have to work with the tiny components, and that means soldering. Yes. Have anybody ever soldered before and loves it? Yeah, see the hands went up. Soldered before? Yeah, love it? No. See, soldering is my new least favorite activity. And I got a couple rules for those who are going to learn how to solder. Rule number 1 is don't touch the pointy part. That's where the hotness is. Rule number 2 is always remember where you put the soldering iron down. And if you violate rule number 2, you're probably going to violate rule number 1. Rule number 3 is everything looks easy on the internet. These guys have been doing soldering for like 50 years. Like, oh, this is a bit, you try to do it yourself, and it's like, black, all over the place. But that said, my first attempts actually went very well. I was able to solder the headers onto the SD card breakout board. I was able to solder headers onto the chip with the wires there so it actually fit into my breadboard. And that went very well. I felt rather proud of myself. Testing. At home, everything went great. And you took it out for a walkabout in the yard, and you're picking up your neighbor's Wi-Fi. That's fantastic. That's cool. Put it in the car, took it for a drive, and everything fell apart. Why? What happened? Well, when I was talking to the guys on the boards, they said, oh yeah, so for power consumption reasons, you're probably going to have to toggle the Wi-Fi chip on and off. But if you turn it back on, you want to put all subsequent code into an if statement, an if clause, status equals Wi-Fi on. Well, this is an Internet of Things device, so status equals Wi-Fi on only returns true if it's associated with a known Wi-Fi access point, which if I'm half a mile down the road is not going to happen. So what I did was I played around with it for a while, and I realized that if I just turned the Wi-Fi chip on and then did an SSID scan before waiting for it to associate, I got everything I needed anyway. So I removed that code from the clause, and now I'm finally working on it. So fantastic. Now I took it for a drive, and I got data back. And I had GPS coordinates, and I had SSIDs, and I had everything I needed. And I'm like, this is awesome. So I took it home, and I put it into Google Earth, and I was driving on the highway, but it had me off in a lake. And I'm trying to do testing from home, and it had me half a mile down the road. I'm like, what's going on? Well, apparently the guy who created the GPS libraries did not do the NMEA conversions properly, and so now these libraries that I've been depending on are useless. So I went back to what I did before with the Arduino. There's tiny GPS++ libraries out there, which I really liked. And so I'm talking to my friend Bill about where I'm stuck, and he's like, oh yeah, it's fine, just port the libraries. I'm like, how do you port libraries? And the way he described it to me is the way it reminded me of my rocket science story. So I'm sitting in a bar one night having drinks with my friends, and this guy gets involved in the conversation. He's a pretty funny guy. So eventually the question comes up, what do you do for a living? He's like, I'm a rocket scientist. And I'm like, no, seriously, what do you do for a living? He's like, no, seriously, I'm a rocket scientist. And so we thought that was funny. He said, so tell me, there's a phrase out there that says it's not rocket science. What do you think of that phrase? He's like, well, I always laugh at that phrase. I'm like, why? Is it because, you know, really there's some science and engineering that goes into building the rocket and the aerodynamics and the fuel and all that good stuff. But really at the end of the day, we put it on the launch pad, hit the red button, and hope for the best. Sometimes it falls over and blows up. Sometimes it blows up. Sometimes it gets almost to space and then dies and blows up. And the hard part is not getting new rockets. The hard part is convincing them to let us use more monkeys. Yeah, because the monkey goes in the rocket. Rocket science humor. Anyway, that's how you port libraries, really. You take the headers out of one thing, put them over here, replace the Arduino headers with the Spark headers, hit compile, and wait for it to scream at you. And when it screams at you, you go over there and fix it, and then do it again until it stops screaming. And if the compiler screams at you and you scream back, you only really succeed in scaring your wife. I know that from experience. So it worked. Oh my goodness, I have ported libraries. I've never done that before. I was so proud of myself, I put them up on GitHub. So the next problem now is power consumption, not so much how much it uses, but how am I going to get something that'll fit in a collar? My buddy Ricky Hill hooked me up with this E-Flight battery that he uses for his drones that he flies around. It's a good form factor, a 3.7 volt, 500 milliamp battery. Worked perfectly for what I want to do. But now I want to test it and see how to best do these things. And you'd think turning everything on and everything off would be the best way to save power. The trick is, though, remember what I told you about how long it takes for the GPS to sync up. It's pulling 350 milliamps at a minimum while it's waiting to find a GPS signal. And if the cat's hiding under a bush, you're just never going to find it and burn right through your battery. So the best thing I found is turn the main chip off, leave the GPS antenna on, and in doing that, collections every 30 seconds lasted 4 hours, collections every 10 minutes lasted 8 hours. And I decided on 5 minutes because 10 minutes just didn't do enough for me. So now it's time to actually make the collar. And oh my God, if you thought soldering was fun, desoldering is twice as fun as soldering ever was. I managed to tear up some chips, man. I had to go buy new stuff. And so I was complaining to my friend Joey, who's a double E. I was like, man, what do I do about this? And he says, yeah, you guys go down to the Nova Labs, your local maker shop. He knows a couple guys down there. Shout out to Nova Labs in Reston, Virginia. Ted, mad scientist, evil genius. He hooked me up with, learned me how to do some Eagle stuff. Again, something that didn't make it into the final product. Brian was my soldering tutor. He hooked me up with the right soldering iron and the right solder, made my life a whole hell of a lot easier. So now where are my makers at? We got to make a cat collar. How does somebody who does chips and programming and networking stuff, I got to make a cat collar with like real cloth and stuff. I'm like, how do I do that? I've got several ideas, but what am I going to do? So I talked to my friend Joe about this problem. He's like, why don't you just go down to Michael's, get a couple ribbons and sew them together, and in the empty spot in the part, you put your tech in there. I'm like, well, okay. So I went down and got some ribbon. It's leopard skin because that's what's in these days with all the kitties, yes. But now I need to sew. I've never sewed anything in my life. Sewing, it's like a grandma skill. Who knows how to do that? So what do? Easy. You get a grandma. This is my wife's grandmother. Her name is Nancy. She was only too happy to help me out because she knew how frustrated I was. And she hooked that collar up, no problem. And so now here's the final collar assembly. We have a $1 bill, the E-Flight battery, the actual collar, and the tech that goes in there. And I wrapped it up in electrical tape, not only to keep the weather off of it, but because there's some flashy bits on the spark that was just going right through the collar. So now we're back to our volunteer cat. This is the cat that still owes me a cell phone. So we're going to send him out with a test collar first, with no tech in it, just a bunch of stuff to make it uncomfortable for him, and see how he tolerated it. And the funny part was he tolerated it fine. All the cat people were saying, oh, that collar's too thick, he's just going to get out of it. I said, no, he was just like, ooh. Remember how he was before? He didn't look happy at all? Check him out now. He's loud and proud and in charge of his entire neighborhood. But see that little piece of metal behind his head? That's the name tag ring. That's supposed to be on the bottom because directly opposite of that is the GPS chip. So we needed to get something to weigh it down, so I went to my local Ranger supply store, and he's a war kitty, so he gets a bullet, right? And that solution worked fine. So now the new plan is the tech goes in the collar goes in the cat goes on the walkabout, and then profit. So the original results were nothing. I'm like, no, I know this works. I've been testing this for months. This cannot fail. So I got all my stuff. I drove over to my friend's Reeves' house, and we tested it, and the collar was working fine. So like, what's wrong? I don't know. It must have been something. So we put the collar back on the cat. Cat walked under a bush, and Reeves and I sat down and had a couple drinks. 20 minutes later, I looked over. The cat's still underneath the bush, cleaning himself. Just, and I'm like, Reeves, is that your cat? And he's like, no. And he gets up, and he walks over to the bush. He's like, yeah, and so he grabs the bush and he shakes it and the cat goes running off there. So we realized a new deployment procedure, let the collar sit outside for 5 to 10 minutes, get a GPS fix first, then bring the cat to the collar, put the collar on the cat and let the cat go for a walkabout and profit this time? Yeah, maybe. Hey, it worked. I was more shocked than anybody. Here are the results of the initial test run for the cat, and I've obfuscated them for obvious reasons. But I've actually, a buddy of mine connected with me on the internet and volunteered to do some visualization stuff here. So look at that. I'd like to point out that I put quite a few months of research into this project, and the first successful deployment of this thing, the cat never left the front yard. And those lines that are coming up represent signal strength and encryption value. So there he is walking around there, not leaving the front yard. Thank you very much, Mr. Kite. But my wife's grandmother was just like, oh, I'd love to know where my cat Coco goes. Could you try it on my cat? Sure. Coco, results that we have here, and I'd like to point out that we've got a lot of open and web encrypted Wi-Fi access points going on here. This is 2014, people. What in the world are we doing? There's some stuff going on with Cox and Infinitive that want to do that, but that's a different topic. So the results of Coco's walkabout are much more successful. And there he goes as he's walking about. You see he's roaming all over the neighborhood. Coco actually caught a mouse during this run. He brought it back to my wife's grandmother. He's like, hey, I got a mouse. And she's like, oh, my God, get out of my... So there are the lines again, representing encryption strength and signal strength. And there he is, walking around. I love how it just sort of twirls and does this stuff there. So what have we learned? A tech hobbyist with no prior firmware experience can create a functional WarKit collar in a short amount of time. And for all the kids out there, this is the real takeaway piece. I didn't know how to do this before I started doing this. I researched it. I beat my head against the wall. I got really, really frustrated. At the end of the day, don't give up. You will beat the tech because you are smarter than the tech. I asked a lot of friends. I got a lot of people to help me, and it was funny. I'd walk into places I'd never been before asking for help, and they're like, what are you doing? And I explained it to them. They're like, that's awesome. We'll totally help you do that. But please, don't give up. You will eventually beat the tech. You will be frustrated, and you'll give up, but then go back to it. Don't give up in the end. And in 2014, there are still unsecured Wi-Fi hotspots about. That's just boggles my mind. And finally, cats are really, really hard to work with. So that's my briefing. Does anybody have any questions? I think I'm over my time. So I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to head over there. If anybody has any questions for me, I'll be very happy to talk to you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.